Well, I'm back after a bit of an unintentional hiatus, but going by the state of Brexit, it's like I never left. Dear God, they can't get their head straight over this. Honestly, with there being so much indecision about, kind of what do we do, what do we give up? Do we give up the right to movement? Do we give up the right to control our borders? Do we give up the right to trade, freely, all that kind of stuff? It's like the country can't make its mind up. But, as I said in one of my previous videos, with 52 to 48% split in the referendum result, maybe that's kind of how it is. In a way, the country is split over it. It can't quite make its mind up. And again, as I've said previously, the only thing you can really take from it is that we don't want to be fully remaining in the EU because, well, if 52% want out, we clearly don't want to stay. But it's also like we don't want to completely remove ourselves from the EU because 48% wanted to remain. So, it's not like we wanted to pull the fast ejector seat. Regardless of what a lot of pro-leave people would say. It wasn't a clear statement that, we must get out. It's the way things were standing is not good enough to the country as a whole. But the opposite is also not exactly wanted by the country as a whole. The way things are going, the country will be a whole. Again, that's how it feels sometimes. But I still think that one of the main things to take away is that even within the Remain and Leave camps, it wasn't kind of completely out, completely in. I did not think that the way things were was perfect in the EU. There were definitely things that were not ideal about it. I just figured that the pros outweighed the cons. There will be people who probably felt about as about as mixed as me, but would just come to the opposite conclusion that it's just there weren't enough pros to outweigh the cons, but would still be sort of as mixed as this. Well, it's not the greatest evil in the world, but it's also not exactly doing perfect. But one of the main things that is definitely true if you look at Europe as a whole, the country as a whole, even just taking a step backwards and looking across the world with, places like America and other countries, the main thing is nobody wants to compromise over anything, basically. It's like people want maximum benefits with minimum costs. And in the EU, we weren't getting that. We weren't supposed to. No country was supposed to. It's a massive group compromise. How to do the best for the greatest amount of people, and, overtly, the benefits weren't always obvious because it's like, well, we don't get this and we lose this and they get that. And that's all that people could see. And again, now when it comes to trying to get out, it's like, well, the thing is we want to be able to go our own way. So why, when we're not a part of your club, can we, not do as we please? Well, because maybe we're still trying to do business with that club. you know, we're not trying to get out of the world. We're just trying to get out of one kind of set of agreements so that we can do some things our own way. But we're still going to have to interact with them on their terms. And again, people see it as, oh, they're not being nice to us because, you know, we want this and they don't. And it's like, why? Are they bigger than us or something? We're one, they're 27. You know, we're just looking at it from what we want to gain and what we don't want to lose. And we're looking at, or at least some certainly kind of pro-Brexit people are looking at it in the case of, well, you know, what are they wanting, you know, what is the EU wanting to get out of it? But again, it's like they got to reach a consensus with 27. They've got to please 27 people for the EU's, or 27 groups of people for the EU side. Really just one for us lot. And again, you know, one of the big things which hit the news recently, and typically it would come from the Daily Mail, is that, the Daily Mail and all of them, or basically effectively sort of Europe-hating people, or that's how it comes across, seem to be complaining that, you know, once we're out of the EU, people will have to pay costs to travel in the EU. That was the whole freedom of movement thing. That certain groups, especially the Daily Mail, were against because it let all those immigrants come into the country. It also allowed us to go on our holidays without having to bloody pay for it, or pay an extra £6 for a visa or whatever, and not, you know, less amounts of faffing around with paperwork and all that kind of crap. They're the same thing. Allowing us to get in and out, allowing other people to get out and in, same difference. You can't stop one without the other. So if you want to make it harder for people to get from the EU to the UK, it's going to be harder for the people in the UK to get into mainland Europe. And people seem surprised about this. I really do despair at sometimes. I mean, that was the whole thing about it. That was one of the main benefits to being in the EU. And I think what a lot of the Leave side are going to start, well, if they've not already started to notice, they're definitely going to start to notice going forward, is that there were a lot of benefits to being in the European Union. They just weren't necessarily direct and immediately visible. You know, the costs, the things we had to pay were immediately visible. Other things that we took for granted because they were effectively sort of a part of the law, it's stuff we effectively inherited from the EU, and now we've got to make our own decisions about those. And also some things suddenly, well, we got it because they did, and when we're out we don't inherit those rules anymore, and suddenly there are various little useful protections that we won't get. Like the recent lack of roaming charges in the EU. Yeah, suddenly, once we're no longer in the EU, the mobile companies don't have to play nice anymore. Because, well, we're not part of that agreement. So their mobile providers don't have to play nice with our mobile providers. Our mobile providers similarly don't have to play nice with their mobile providers. And our mobile providers suddenly don't have to give up any concessions to profit, which companies are effectively by definition, bound to seek. That's their whole point, to exist. Privately owned companies exist to create profit. So unless there are bits of regulation in place to stop them screwing everybody over, that's kind of what they're going to do. If the rule that basically said, you don't have to charge people an arm and a leg if they want to phone home when they're in France, despite the fact that, for example, where they are in France might be closer to where they live in Canterbury than their mate who lives in Scotland, no, they're still going to go, no, that call to Scotland that you don't really need to make and don't make very often when you're at home, that can be nice and cheap. But when you're over in Calais and kind of wanting to check in on all your mates, rather than using Facebook, and even then it's data rates as well, it's like, no, you're going to be charged an arm and a leg for it, because we can. No one's stopping us anymore. Well, we never used to get this. Yeah, we used to be in the European Union, but 52% of the country wanted to pull us out of it. Because they couldn't see the benefits. And that was, I think, to be honest, one of the main drawbacks that I think it still has, even with, its remaining member countries. Some of the benefits aren't immediately obvious, or they're not direct. It's an overall benefit from playing nice. And that's sometimes a little bit harder to quantify. And, kind of, if everyone kind of wants to go, well, we want what's best for us, it's like, yeah, but some of what's good for you comes from being in this big gang, basically. But it's not as obvious, and the costs are too obvious sometimes to some people, and, it all devolves into this great big huge mess. Because, well, yeah, basically, it's just, it especially doesn't help that the current government is, it's a Conservative government, that they aren't even a majority government, and they, unfortunately, a lot of them are firmly on the Brexit side. It's a lot of the decision makers, and also, well, not even necessarily the decision makers, but the thing is, because if they want to get a parliamentary majority in various issues in, well, Parliament, you kind of need to have the majority of your party on side, ideally. And here's the problem. I suspect that it's in Parliament, you've got, and certainly in government, so in basically the people who are going to put forward the choices that everyone's going to vote on, the majority of them are kind of pro-Brexit. But possibly more of them are than is kind of, statistically indicative of the UK as a whole. Again, as I said, many a time, even just in this video, it's a mess. It really is. And unlike when I turn my lounge into an impromptu recording studio, it's not the kind of mess that can basically be hidden by, bits of fabric hanging from messy bits of furniture. This is more like hanging your dirty laundry out to the international public. But then again, I think most countries are doing that at the moment. All humans, especially when it comes to politicians, tend to come over as being arseholes. And to be honest, if you look at the news, especially political news these days, yeah. Brexit is just one symptom of it. I could swear I'd put that thing on mute. Ah well, I was about to sign off anyway, because I've run out of rambling and I probably should eat. So, until next time, see ya.